Well, good morning, James, and thank you for agreeing to be interviewed for Community Corner. This is a space where I interview people from in and around Dundonald and Loans. So, James, would you want to maybe tell people who you are and how we know each other?
So, I'm James Hogg, and I am, in relation to yourselves, I'm what's known as an ordained local minister within the Church of Scotland, which means I'm ordained, but they don't pay me, and I'm only supposed to do 8 hours a week. But at the moment, a bit more than that.
I'm laughing, James. You're doing way more than that.
And I'm also acting as interim moderator at St Meddan's in Troon for them at the moment, because they're in vacancy. They don't have a full-time minister. And the Church of Scotland, being the way the Church of Scotland is, it likes fancy, complicated names. So rather than standing-in minister, they have the title of interim moderator because you moderate the Kirk session.
So what's your day job, James?
So I work for NATS in air traffic control. My official title is I'm a flight information safety officer, which means I speak to the little airplanes, not the big ones, going between airports in Scotland. So it was a wee bit quiet during lockdown, but it's really back to normal again in terms of traffic.
So you've got a demanding full-time job, but you also work, I know, pretty much full-time in ministry. I don't know how you do it. And you've got 2 small children.
Yes, well, I'm married, which helps. So Helen supports me a lot in what I'm doing. She's the pastoral assistant at St Meddan's, and so a lot of the things we kind of share and we plan out. And I've got a really good team in this session at St Meddan's as well that help a lot. So Elaine, she's our session clerk, does a lot, and a lot of the other team as well support us as well. So it's just about sharing the load, kind of delegating out tasks, making sure things get done, and just moving forward 1 week at a time. We have a weekly planning meeting, and so we kind of plan with a team what's happening that week, and obviously there's the kind of church structures on top in terms of business committee and session and stuff as well. So it's just a case of taking 1 week at a time.
So I thought, James, today we could talk about worship. Now, I know at St Meddan's, like at Dundonald, you had to adapt the worship during lockdown. So yes. What have been some of the challenges that you faced as a congregation, and what have been some of the unexpected blessings at this time?
So in some ways, I felt that when lockdown came, my entire, not life, but what we'd been doing had come to this. So we had a green screen. Helen had bought me a green screen about 2 or 3 years ago for my birthday. We'd never used it. And we've all got all these microphones and audio interfaces and cameras around the house. And suddenly all these things come into their own straight away. And so it was quite a seismic shift. We were conscious before lockdown, obviously, with the virus coming, that we wanted to be able to stream so that people that might not be able to, because obviously at the start we were assuming that we could still go to church, but there might be people that weren't able to go to church. So my thought was, how do we include those people? So actually the last weekend we had a church service, we did a practice stream of that from Meadowgreen, because at St Meddan's we do a service both at our main church down in the town centre, but also up in the new houses at Glendevin at Meadowgreen. So we streamed from that, and that kind of gave us some ways on where we were going forward and how we were doing that. Helen and I were quite familiar with the streaming software already because we had done it with the school, but only internally, because we want people to be able to feel welcome in church and feel hospitable in church. So when we had the school services, one of the things that Helen had noticed was a lot of the parents who were in the balconies couldn't see the children. Mm-hmm. He came up with a way of streaming only internally, so it didn't go to the internet, so that we've got screens in St Meddan's, and so the parents could then see their children mm-hmm. down below. So when P1 stood up and they were behind the balcony and mm-hmm. nobody could see them, people could see them and still feel welcome and wanted to come and make it a useful space. So all that technology, all that skills, and we just went, right, how are we going to approach doing it? And then obviously lockdown happened and we weren't allowed to meet together in person. So one of the things I felt very passionately about, and why we went with streaming rather than pre-recording and uploading, was even though we are in separate physical locations, I felt as a church we should meet together to continue to worship. Mm-hmm. And that's the advantage that streaming gave us, because people knew that I was there speaking to them in their houses, just in the same way I would be there on a Sunday morning at church, speaking to them in church. We heavily wanted people to comment on the video stream so that other people could see that other people were there, and we can still have that feeling of continuity as church. We were still meeting together as a body, just not in physical presence. And in some ways it was getting back to the early church, because we reinvented house church for the 21st century.
Absolutely, I know. So you are kind of maybe a wee bit ahead of the game, because you're quite clued up with technology, and you had quite a lot of equipment in the house.
Yes.
Were you live streaming from your house rather than the church? Yeah.
So what we did, just to make it easier for ourselves, and because the guidelines and the rules were changing so quickly, and what we did was, it was quite funny. So we changed one of our spare bedrooms into what we call now the studio. So there's one wall with a big green screen on it, and there's a telly in front of us, a confidence thing, so we can see what's going out. There's a camera on top of that, so we can see that. We look at the telly, but you're looking at the camera, so you get away with that. We had to sort of invest in lighting to make sure the lighting was correct. And there was some people were watching our live stream thinking I was at church, because one of the things I did to keep people in a kind of idea that it is church and keep the familiar was I'd taken a couple of pictures of certain aspects of the church, so that we project on the green screen the church, so people can feel that familiarity of meeting together as a kind of continuity. Because the other thought was, going into, obviously we want to keep it as, in some ways, not as close as possible, because this is a time for change as well, and change isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, change is usually a good thing. But we wanted to keep the continuity of people there, but we also conscious that at some point we're going to come out of this. And at some point we're going to have to figure out a way of, I think the government talked about blended learning. We're going to have blended church. And I felt that if we kind of stuck with streaming to a certain extent, it would help us transition on the other side.
Yeah.
And
so in a way, you're kind of, is your church then St Meddan's, because I have been in once, I know it's got new screens and it has quite good sound, so your audio visual is quite good, and you've got Wi-Fi, so you're pretty much all set up to go and to be able to live stream from your church building too.
Well, yes and no. So we did have Wi-Fi, but it was mostly in the halls. So one of the things we've done, well, so as interim moderator, you're just supposed to keep the kind of thing steady. And the church had agreed, as part of the stonework renovation, to remove some pews about 2 years ago as part of the project. But this hadn't happened. And so as a way to facilitate social distancing and ease social distancing, the church has now approved to take these pews out now. So that's happening at the moment, but we didn't actually have internet in the sanctuary. So we've had to pay a company to run a cable from the office into the middle of the sanctuary. And we've invested about, I would say it's going to end up costing between about £1,500 and £2,000 in terms of equipment, so that we can live stream our services from the church. We bought a device that's about £800, so you don't need a separate computer. You just plug the camera into that, and it can go straight to YouTube. And you can plug we use PowerPoint or something like PowerPoint for our hymns. And so that can get plugged into this as well. And so hopefully what will happen is, when we slowly start moving back into church, people will be able to either choose to come, or they can stay at home, and the experience in some ways will be relatively similar. In some ways I would argue that the experience at home might still be better, because we're not going to be allowed singing, and you'll be able to sing in your house.
Yeah, I know. So it's real challenges and hurdles to get over to move into this next phase, isn't it? We've all now got into a rhythm of how it works for each church. You know, we haven't been live streaming, but we've been doing pre-recorded services from the manse that are then really edited so beautifully by our session clerk, Bob, so that we're adding in
Bob, the floating head with the piano playing.
It is good, and also bringing in the photographs. The feedback we've had is the photographs from the surrounding area of Dundonald have really been quite important, especially for folks that were shielded, that weren't getting out, that they can still see the beauty of the place that they live in. And I think it's just a reminder that we worship in different ways, and for some people, listening to long streams of words in a sermon is too much. and the visual of imagery is really important in how people learn and how people can and worship God. So we've got a lot to think about as a church and how we move into the next phase when we're back in our building, because our building has nothing in it. So we have no Wi-Fi, we have a very poor sound system and no vision. So how we move to the next stage and still keep our online presence is a bit of a minefield, but we're working on that right now. So just thinking about worship, James. Some people might say that worship is only something that happens on a Sunday morning in a church building.
Yes.
What's your thoughts about what worship is?
So if I was going to be trite, I'd say no, because we have a Thursday service as well. But worship's a lot bigger than that. I think Sundays are important because I think more than the one thing that lockdowns taught me is coming together as a church is important, and physically being together as people is important. And I think one of the detriments of lockdown has been the lack of human contact. And I'm quite lucky because not only have I live with a family, so I have a wife and I have 2 children, so physical contact in some ways isn't so much of a problem because you're living with people side by side. And also working during I was technically, I felt like the fakest key worker ever, but I did have the letter, and so I was still going to work and interacting with people. But I think Sundays are important, or at least a time for the church to come together is really important, and that would be one of the things that lockdown taught me. But worship's such a bigger thing as well, because worship's such a big word. We worship without realizing we're worshipping a lot of the time, and getting to a bigger context in terms of idols and God and things like that is we can worship our idols without even realizing it, and we don't need to go somewhere to do that. We do it unintentionally. Sometimes we fall into the habit, and we kind of look at that, whether it be cars or houses or whatever, the internet, wasting times on computer games. Where do we spend our time? And in some ways, worship is about time, because we can do worship by following God. We worship God by not only listening to what he tells us, but doing what he tells us. Does that make sense, I think?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so actually worship to a certain extent is making the sacrifice. There's sacrifice in worship, and if you read the Bible and the whole narrative of the Bible, there has always been sacrifice when it comes to worship, from the very start in Genesis all the way through to the end. But what that sacrifice is changes over time, and obviously in the Old Testament we had the temple and we had sacrifices there where they were sacrificing animals and grain. But now we are to live as living sacrifices. And I think fundamentally when it comes to worship and worshipping God, it's our living sacrifice that shows our worship to God, and actually shows the world our worship to God in the best way possible. People can get hung up on the Sunday and singing hymns together and making church all about the Sunday, and that being the important thing, and that being the way to judge numbers and how people interact and things like that. And we've finally got that person because they're now coming along on a Sunday. But actually we should really be acting as how, as a church, are we impacting in people's lives? How are we ourselves becoming more like Jesus, and how are we helping other people become more like Jesus?
Yeah, I agree with you completely, James. I've just actually written about this in our Contact magazine that's coming out in August, in my letter, because I think one thing that I always challenge people on is when they say to me, I'm a Christian, but I don't need to go to church. I don't need to be a part of a worshipping body of Christ. And I really challenge that, because that's not biblical. It's not what we're told to do by God. We're a body of believers together, supporting and serving together. So yes, worship is way more than what happens on a Sunday morning, but we are supposed to come together as Christians, united in our faith. And I think what this time of lockdown's been quite good at in helping people to discover other ways of worshipping God. You know, you can worship God when you choose to serve somebody rather than serve yourself. You can worship God when you stop yourself about to say something that you know isn't encouraging or uplifting to another person. You can worship God by walking in creation and being aware of the amazing things that he has blessed us with to enjoy. So, you know, worship is way more than what happens in a building, but coming together as a body of Christ is important too.
And I think in some ways, when people, I've encountered that all through my life. Like, I remember at university, oh, I didn't need to go to church, I need to go up a hill. And I think some of it's about control, because people are scared about other people impacting on what they believe and changing them. And so it's a case of, if you're up the hill with God, then yes, you can talk to God and you can commune with God at the top of the hill, and he can change you. But there's something about rubbing up against people week by week by week that shows where your faults are quicker in some ways, where you can see where you do want to do things better, or you think, I didn't act as best as I could there. Because I was talking to Helen about this recently. The amazing thing, in fact, it was Jack's birthday yesterday, and we finished it off by going to the beach because it was sunny, and we went to get a slushie at the kiosk in Troon. And the amount of people that we bumped into on that promenade that we knew, and primarily most of the time it was either through school or through church. But the amazing thing about church is you don't get to choose your family, you don't get to choose your church or the people that's in your church, because they come. And that's the amazing thing about it, is it's so intergenerational. It's the only place in society, I find, where you can randomly meet people that are not like yourself. Because if you join the bowling club, or if you join the tennis club or whatever, you've got that kind of common interest, and to a certain extent it attracts similar people. In the same way that if you go to a flying club or whatever, and even in school, you're bumping it into parents that are roughly the same age as you, because your children are the same age as their children. Whereas I go to church and there'll be somebody from 6 months to 99, and they'll be from all different economic backgrounds. They'll have different opinions to yourselves, and in meeting people with different opinions and meeting people from different perspectives, it causes you to have to put grace into action.
Absolutely, James. Yep. I think it's very easy to be a Christian on your own,
yes.
but we're not told to do that. And yes, church can be sometimes quite a hurtful place to be, because people are people. And we're all fully human, and sometimes we do and say the wrong things to each other. But it's learning how to be gracious and loving to one another, and being part of a church family teaches you so much about that. And you know, on you go, James.
No, I was going to say, it was interesting. I was listening to a podcast recently, and it described propensity, and I'll have to blank it about here, but a hyper propensity to, well, I would say screw things up. He had used a stronger word. And we as humans, the interesting thing I always find out about humans, and why atheism doesn't emotionally work for me, there's many other reasons, and that'd be an entirely longer 10-minute conversation. but we know this world isn't right. In your heart of hearts, you know that there isn't justice, and there isn't certain things out there. And you can feel it in your bones. It's like a kind of, you don't need to even know it. You don't have to be taught it. You know that there's better than this. So the question I always have for people is, where does that feeling of betterness, that you know that this world could be better, come from? And I think that comes from God, because I think this world was created good, it was created well, and then obviously sin came into this world and corrupted it and broken it. And it's broken it in ways that we don't even imagine in terms of society and systemic. That division of sin not only cut us up from God, it cuts us up from each other. And because of that, it seeps into every organization we have. And so therefore we do encounter it in the church, and the church can be hurtful places and abusive places, but it's only through us allowing ourselves to have the grace of God come into our lives, and us show grace to other people, that we can actually show a better way, that love actually genuinely does win. And that love isn't just love. Love is a powerful force. It's not just, we kind of in the society today focus on eros, to use the Greek term in terms of love, but actually the grace kind of love, the agape love, the willing to let the other person win, even though you think you should win, the ability to give up something, not just because you're being nice, but because it hurts, and showing that grace to somebody. There's an amazing book that completely changed my faith, and you probably have read it, is Amazing Grace by Philip Yancey.
You know, what's so amazing by grace? Yeah.
What's amazing? What did I say? Amazing Grace. So that's the song. Yeah. What's
so amazing about grace? That's it.
Yes, and it's a phenomenal book. It's got rough edges and it's got bits I wouldn't entirely agree with everything said in the book, but it does try to encompass the idea of what is fundamentally different about Christianity and what is so powerful about grace.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the simple message I give to people that know nothing about Christianity, know nothing about Jesus, is when you come to Jesus, God makes you the best version of yourself.
Yes.
And all those rough edges start to be chipped away. And, you know, yes, we all need to ask for forgiveness on a daily basis for the things we've done and said that are wrong. But who wouldn't want to be the best version of themselves? Who wouldn't want to reflect the love and grace of our Lord Jesus Christ? So, yeah, we're both passionate evangelists, aren't we? Now, you and Helen have been immensely supportive to me as a brand new out of the wrapper minister.
Coming much out behind you. To be fair, I think you're the newest. No, you're not the newest anymore, are you? I'm not the newest. No. I'm a year and a bit now. But you are You're just behind me. Presbytery. But not knowing an awful lot of people in Troon and Ayrshire, you and Helen have been very supportive to me and Dundonald, been great colleagues to me. Now, I know you're a man of deep, deep faith. How have you kept yourself spiritually well in this tough time? How do you keep yourself spiritually well in tough times? So it's interesting. I think this is the hardest question. It was interesting you said deep, deep faith, and I don't see that in myself. Maybe other people see it, but I don't see it because faith's a funny word. And sometimes, especially in this time of lockdown, you have to take one step at a time. There's that bit in the Bible that talks that your word is a lamp unto my feet. And I always think a lamp unto your feet's a funny word because it's a bit like holding the torch at your feet. You don't see where you're going, you just see what's in front of you. And I think when it comes to faith with God, sometimes that's what we have to do. You have to take that one step. And I think the most important thing in my faith that keeps me going, and we might talk about practicalities in a minute, but is hope. So the Bible talks about hope. And it talks about hope in a different way to so I support a football team, and I'm half tempted not to tell you which one that is because it will divide the audience. But they might switch off now. Yeah, well, that's it. You see, you're a bit worried. If Alan McWilliams can support them, then so can I. But I kind of think you hope your football team will win the league. And depending on who your football team is, that hope might be a bit more solid than other hopes. But at the end of the day, there's not security in that hope. And so what I think and what keeps me going is the hope and certainty in God and the hope and certainty in Jesus Christ. I've said in a couple of sermons a couple of times is I'm the kind of guy, and this divides opinion as well, that if you've got a book, and I've read about 3 or 4 chapters in, and especially if it's a thriller or a mystery, I'll just read the last chapter. Oh no! Yes. Seriously, I will flip, or I'm watching a TV series and it's kind of getting a bit slow, so I'll go on Wikipedia and find out what happens in the end. And that's a bit like the Bible, because the Bible leaves us with this book that's great because it tells you what's going to happen in the end. We've got Revelation to look to see, and we've got to understand, I think because of Enlightenment values, that we treat faith a bit like it's an adjunct to how we live our lives. Our Christianity is an extra bolt on what we do. You go to church on Sunday, I go to the golf club. And that's not it. It's we have to imbibe the entire story of Christianity, that narrative of Genesis and God creating the world good and the fall, all the way through to Revelation, and understand where we sit in that story of faith. And that our faith mirrors that story in a small way, that we are part of the small. Now, Stephen will do this better than I because he's the musician, but you know how you get a little bit of music in the big symphony? Little kind of refrain or paraphrase. We're that little bit in that big story, and we have to fit where our faith fits into that bigger story, knowing what the end of that story is. And what can happen, and what can happen to me a lot, is you lose that perspective. It's like you're climbing the hill and you don't look to the top, and it becomes a drudge. And sometimes you have to reset your mind, reset where you're going, think who is going to win this battle. C.S. Lewis said that Christianity is a bit like we're living in a time like after D-Day in World War II. The Allies have landed in Normandy, and the end is on the wall. The writing's on the end of the wall for the Germans. They're in retreat, and they're in retreat everywhere. And there's still going to be suffering, and they're still going to pain. But we know what the end of the story is. And that's where we live. And it's to remind us ourselves constantly, day by day, that is where we are in our faith. And some of the ways of doing that is either reading the Bible, especially through a reading plan. I'm using a Max Lucado kind of book at the moment. It does a verse and a kind of commentary on it, and just a little thing to keep you going, spending time praying with God. I listen to a lot of podcasts. Unbelievable by Jason Briley from Premier Christianity. There you go, there's a plug for his one. It's quite good. It's about apologetics, and it's about having conversations, and conversations in a really good way that society doesn't do nowadays. We tend to have people shouting at each other from different directions and different viewpoints, and basically saying, if you don't agree with my viewpoint, you're evil and don't deserve to exist. And I kind of say that flippantly, but there's a truth in it in some ways now, you can see in the arguments. So what I really like about that is you'll have two people on from two different viewpoints, and they will discuss it civilly and well. There's other kind of podcasts I listen to as well. And it just means that when I'm talking about getting back to worshipping again, whatever you're doing, from cutting the grass, listening to a podcast, learning more about God. Just doing things when you can, because it can be busy with having a full-time job. It's shift work, so that helps. Being a parent, being a husband, just takes all its toll. So it's about trying to find that rhythm and thing that works for you. I wouldn't like to say you should do this and you should have your quiet time and da 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 da. That works for people, and if it works for you, that is great. I don't have a problem with that. But try and find a way. You are unique. And God knows you're unique, and He has a way for you to get to know Him better that's specific to you. And so my question would be to find out more about yourself, find out what ticks your box, how you work, and move on from there and work with God with you.
Oh, thank you, James. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
You know, it's keeping yourself spiritually well is just so important, and all the things that you've just mentioned there are superb. I think another reason for being in and around other Christians is we can learn from each other's faith, and that's why I've chosen to interview people of faith, for getting them to share their opinions and thoughts on lots of different topics, because that enhances our own faith and understanding of God as well. And I think you have brought many different dimensions about Christianity to life for us. So thank you for your time. It's been lovely speaking to you. I don't know if you heard it, but the quarry did a blast halfway through the service, and everything rumbled inside the manse. But maybe it's picked up on the screen. But anyway, thank you for joining us. I will see you in Helen very soon. I'll say goodbye. Bye for now.